Alright YouTube, so we are back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and today we have a Tifa-specific video. It's something I seen on Reddit the other day. Speaking of that, I seen a post on Reddit, I believe it was yesterday, where somebody had just recently finished Remake. They were trying to avoid spoilers this entire time, and they were looking for commentary and analysis, like channels and videos, and somebody actually recommended my channel, Crimson 7 Phantom, which I believe I recognize the name, like Crimson Phantom. I've definitely seen those comments on the channel before. I'm always appreciative of that stuff, man, because I don't know how often people are, like, you know, sharing the channel, sharing the videos, recommending the channel or videos. Like, I'm not sure how often that happens. I pretty much just upload a video, share it to social media, and leave it up to the YouTube algorithm gods. So, seeing somebody recommend the channel, like, I'm very appreciative. Thank you, man. Anyways, on to the video. So, I seen this the other day, again, also on Reddit. Somebody shared that there was some concept art for Zangan in some remake art book. I believe it's the World Preview book. That's like the most recent art book, if I'm not mistaken. Whatever the book is, it doesn't matter. There's concept art for Zangan in it, and he was the only character within this book who was not in Remake. Remake Part 1, of course, but obviously this is interesting because initially when it came to the World Preview book, I thought, you know, given the name, we would literally preview the world. Like, they'd be showing locations around the world, potentially, like concept art for whatever locations there might be in Part 2, potentially. Maybe some other characters from those locations. Like, but the fact that Zangan is the only character within this book that gets concept art, he's the only character that did not make it into Remake Part 1, is very kind of weird, because there's plenty of other characters within the world of Gaia and FF7 that you think could be in this book that weren't in Part 1. Like Bugenhagen, for example. Now, I can kind of understand why they wouldn't show him, because if you're somebody who's going into Remake fresh, you don't know anything about FF7, and you come across him in Cosmo Canyon, you're going to be like, what the hell is going on with this old dude floating on a ball? So I can kind of get why they wouldn't show him specifically, but the point is he's a much more prominent character in the FF7 story than Zangan, so it's kind of weird that that's the one character they choose. Which is why some people are speculating whether or not there's going to be, like, Tifa DLC at some point, since Zangan is, like, you know, her trainer. He's the guy that trained Tifa in martial arts. So for the fact that he has concept art means he should have been in Remake Part 1, but he wasn't. So maybe he was a part of, like, a DLC coming out, or maybe some cut content or something like that. People were discussing Tifa DLC with this concept art, but also with that cut chapter we talked about recently. People were commenting on the video about it. And I don't know if people were saying that they want that cut chapter to be made into a DLC for Remake. I'm not saying I wouldn't buy that. I'm not saying I wouldn't play that, but it's just kind of obscure. Like, it's a random chapter that's supposed to take place roughly in the middle of the game. That's a weird thing to, like, make into a DLC and sell. I kind of don't, as much as I'd play that and buy that, that's not what I want. Like, if they're going to come out with some sort of DLC for Remake, I want it to be post-Remake story, right? Post-Midgar. I want, like, maybe we travel to Calm and get the Calm flashback, and maybe that's kind of it, or maybe a little bit more past that. Like, I don't want something that takes place prior to the events of where we're at the end of the game. It's not like I'm totally against prequel stuff, obviously. Crisis Core, one of my favorite games of all time. Zack Fair's one of my favorite Final Fantasy characters. Total, probably my favorite Final Fantasy VII character. But also you gotta factor in, if we're talking about this specifically, them taking a cut chapter and turning it into DLC, like, that's not a good thing. Like, taking cut content from a game, turning right around and putting out as DLC and selling it. You want your DLC to be additional content, not something they pulled out of the game and then put back in and sold to you again. Isn't that what they did with Final Fantasy 15? Wasn't, like, Luna Frey or somebody's, like, chapter supposed to be in the base game, and then they made it into, like, an episode? And that's kind of what this would be, too. Like, people are wanting a Tifa DLC. Again, I would buy that, I would play that, but weren't people complaining about 15 having, like, character-specific DLCs? But I think when it comes to FF7 and Remake, if they handled it correctly, again, that's important, handled it correctly, I think they could get away with doing character-specific DLCs, because we're such fans of these characters, right? So if they were to give these characters a whole, like, you know, chapter or two of content specific to them, story specific to them, it'd be kind of cool, man. I just don't know what you do with that for, like, what would what would a Sid-specific chapter be about? Or, like, a Vincent chapter, for example. That one would actually be pretty goddamn cool now that I'm talking about it. Despite us having, you know, quite a bit of backstory and story in general for Vincent, I would still buy a DLC dedicated to him. Anyways, back on topic, kind of trailed off there for a minute. When it comes to the Zangan concept art, my other thought with it was maybe he was supposed to be in Part 1, which is why he's in this book, but maybe it was like a flashback segment that was cut from the game, or maybe they decided against showing him for some reason in Part 1. Like, maybe they made a scene with him and they're like, we're going to save that for Part 2 or something, maybe. They also could have put Zangan in this art book as kind of that new thing to be in the book, you know, because I believe, despite the name World Preview, I believe it's just about the first game and about Midgar. So having Zangan in there, it's kind of what that thing people can talk about, that talking point, like, hey, here's something we haven't seen yet, Zangan, which we're doing right now. So when it comes to the concept art, I'm kind of stuck between whether or not it's, you know, Zangan was supposed to be in Part 1, but then they took whatever he was going to be a part of out of the game, or them just wanting to put something new into the book, and I don't know which one I think. We've seen Square Enix kind of give us future concept art, so to speak, with like that Nibelheim concept art we looked at recently from the remake Ultimania. But as we talked about in our last upload, like we've already got a very, very good extensive look at Nibelheim, so that concept art isn't necessarily new. It's not something we haven't actually seen yet. We've seen a lot of Nibelheim. When it comes to Remake Part 2, we're going to see the character of Zangan, assuming they follow the original game, pretty much right at the beginning. We see him during the Calm flashback, during the Nibelheim incident. Cloud, though it's not really Cloud, we won't go into spoilers here, and Zangan are trying to help people around Nibelheim. So we're assuming that Calm flashback's going to happen at the beginning of Part 2, so we should see the character pretty quickly, which is maybe why there's already concept art for him. At the very least, it's pretty cool to discuss, man, but I want to pass off to you guys. What are your thoughts on this concept art for Zangan? It's cool to see somebody or something we haven't seen yet, right? Something that did not exist in Part 1, getting to get a preview of the character, even if he's not like that prominent of a character. I wonder how much the character of Zangan's going to be in the remake story, because he was in the original game, obviously. He was in Before Crisis. He was in Crisis Core. He was in the Last Order, like, anime, movie thing, whatever that was. So he's been around. He's been in a lot of different stuff when it comes to FF7. So I wonder how much they're going to put him into the remake story this time around. Anyways, my dudes, that is the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new to update more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter, @David. I'm a Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.